Hey everyone, welcome. Tonight, we're taking a slightly different path, one that is less about textbooks and more about the pungent, fragrant, and occasionally bewildering world of medieval intoxication. Yes, people back then experimented with substances, and yes, sometimes the results were bizarre, sometimes surprisingly ingenious. Before we dive in, a quick reminder: if you enjoy these journeys into the past, give the video a like and consider subscribing, but only if it genuinely brings you curiosity or joy. And drop a comment letting me know where you're tuning in from and what time it is for you. It's endlessly fascinating to see the spread of viewers across the globe. Now settle in, dim the lights, maybe turn on a gentle fan, and allow yourself to drift into the strange and sometimes mystical universe of medieval Europe. When people imagine the Middle Ages, it's tempting to picture a grim, mud-splattered landscape filled with monasteries, plagues, and the occasional potato. But the reality is far more colorful and experimental. Hidden beneath the surface of black-robed monks and sun-baked peasants was a world of curiosity, risk-taking, and yes, recreational, or at least mind-altering, experimentation. Life in the medieval period was harsh. Electricity was non-existent, coffee hadn't yet crossed Europe, and mental health support was rudimentary at best. Entertainment consisted of simple amusements or communal gatherings, and most people were consumed with survival. Against this backdrop, it's hardly surprising that herbalists, monks, nuns, and peasants alike would experiment with substances that could alter perception, dull pain, or provide a brief escape from reality. But unlike the casual use in modern times, these experiences were interpreted through the lens of spirituality, medicine, or divination. Mind-altering plants were everywhere. They weren't necessarily recreational, at least not in the way we might think today. They were seen as medicines, spiritual tools, or instruments of mystical experience. Witches, apothecaries, and herbalists all had their own perspectives on how, and when, to use them. Sometimes ingestion was voluntary, sometimes accidental, and sometimes ceremonial. Mushrooms, herbs, roots, and resins were the pharmacy of the era, accessible to anyone with a garden, a mortar and pestle, and perhaps a touch of daring. Nature was the dealer, and her dosage could be mercilessly precise or deadly unpredictable. Take, for instance, Henbane, one of the most notorious and versatile plants of the time. Botanically known as Hyoscyamus niger, Henbane was both revered and feared. It was a staple in the medieval pharmacopoeia, utilized by physicians, monks, herbalists, and, in more folklore-tinged contexts, by witches seeking visions. When properly prepared, Henbane offered relief. It eased toothaches, promoted sleep, and provided a sedative effect during childbirth. But missteps could be catastrophic. Overdose or improper preparation could lead to delirium, hallucinations, convulsions, or wild, disorienting behavior, sometimes culminating in death. Henbane's effects were due to powerful alkaloids like scopolamine, hyoscyamine, and atropine. These compounds interact with the nervous system, disrupting neurotransmitter signals and producing vivid, sometimes terrifying, hallucinations. Ancient people may not have understood the chemistry, but they recognized its potency. Henbane could be ingested as a tea, smoked, or even infused into fat and applied topically. The plant's versatility made it indispensable in the medieval toolkit, though it was not without controversy. Clergy often frowned upon its use, fearing that chemically induced visions were not divine in origin, but dangerously deceptive. Then there was Mandrake, perhaps the most iconic of all medieval herbs. Mandragora officinarum was both celebrated and feared. The plant's bifurcated, humanoid-like roots and potent psychoactive properties made it the subject of myth, superstition, and elaborate rituals. Mandrake was reputed to induce sedation, analgesia, aphrodisiacal effects, and prophetic dreams. Boiled in wine, it could calm pain. Inhaled as a vapor, it could trigger vivid hallucinations. The most famous lore surrounding Mandrake was its scream. Texts of the period warned that uprooting a mandrake could unleash a deathly cry capable of killing anyone who heard it. This led to ingenious and slightly macabre Harvesting techniques. One widely cited method involved tying the root to a dog and pulling it from a safe distance. The poor animal bore the brunt of the plant's lethal shriek, leaving the human harvester unscathed. These stories, while steeped in superstition, reflected genuine respect and fear for the plant's power. Deadly nightshade, or belladonna, was another herb straddling the line between utility and danger. Its very name evokes caution. Belladonna was used to dilate pupils for cosmetic purposes, alleviate pain, and, in certain doses, provoke hallucinations. Yet misuse could be fatal. Belladonna, mandrake, and henbane were often combined into complex concoctions, teas, tinctures, or the notorious flying ointments, designed to produce visions or out-of-body experiences. Sometimes these applications were voluntary. Other times, they were applied during medical treatments or ceremonial rituals, with results ranging from relief to terror. Flying ointments are particularly fascinating. Recipes, often recorded in alchemical texts or witches' manuals, combined multiple psychoactive plants with fats or oils intended for transdermal absorption. Applied to the skin, these ointments could induce hallucinations so vivid that users reported experiences of levitation or mystical flight. It's tempting to dismiss these accounts as purely mythological, but modern pharmacology confirms that the plant constituents, henbane, belladonna, mandrake, and others, are indeed capable of producing hallucinogenic, dissociative, and anesthetic effects. Beyond the pharmacology, what stands out is the integration of these substances into daily life, medicine, and ritual. Physicians consulted herbals to alleviate pain, fever, or insomnia. Monks cultivated their own gardens to produce tinctures and salves. Midwives and nuns wielded knowledge of these plants for childbirth, analgesia, or ceremonial purposes. Even peasants, often relying on local wisdom passed orally, had encounters with these herbs, though often with less predictability. Usage ranged from medicinal and spiritual to experimental, accidental, or recreational. Henbane's versatility, for example, meant it was everywhere, from the apothecary to the home garden. In small doses, it sedated and eased discomfort. In larger amounts, it could induce delirium, hallucinations, and wild, unpredictable behavior. Medieval records recount everything from visions of spirits to talking plants, reflecting both reverence and caution. The effects were nonlinear. The same plant could heal or harm, enlighten or confuse, depending on dose, preparation, and context. Mandrake, with its anthropomorphic roots, carried both practical and mystical significance. It was used as an anesthetic for surgical procedures, a sedative, or an aphrodisiac. The root's human-like shape made it a potent symbol in folklore, associated with fertility, prophecy, and protection. Warnings of the mandrake's deadly scream created a cultural mythology that persisted for centuries. Stories of creative harvesting, tied to dogs or ropes, showcased the ingenuity and dark humor of medieval herbalists navigating the fine line between danger and utility. Belladonna's hallucinogenic properties were also woven into ritual and medicine. It could induce visions interpreted as divine or prophetic, used carefully in religious ceremonies or mystical practices. Yet accidental ingestion or overuse could cause delirium, convulsions, or death. Together, these plants formed a complex pharmacopoeia, reflecting a sophisticated empirical understanding of botanical chemistry long before the advent of modern science. The Middle Ages were a period in which perception, medicine, and spirituality were closely intertwined. Psychoactive plants were not used casually. They were treated as tools with potential for both insight and danger. Herbs, roots, and fungi were employed to alleviate pain, induce visions, or provide spiritual experiences. In monasteries, convents, and homes, knowledge of these plants was meticulously preserved. Recipes, oral instructions, chants, and ritualized practices ensured that brewing, dosing, and application were consistent, albeit always with inherent risk. In addition to medicine and ritual, these substances shaped folklore and culture. Stories of Mandrake screams, flying ointments, and visions induced by Belladonna and Henbane were recorded, passed down, and embellished over generations. Witches, healers, and herbalists became cultural touchstones, reflecting society's fascination with, and fear of, altered states of consciousness. Consumption of these plants could lead to visionary experiences, prophetic dreams, or creative insight. Equally, it could result in delirium, madness, or death. The use of these herbs also intersected with social hierarchy. Access, preparation, and interpretation often depended on class or occupation. Elite households and monasteries maintained controlled cultivation, with trained staff overseeing the preparation and application of psychoactive substances. Peasants and laborers relied on local wisdom, often encountering these plants accidentally or under less predictable conditions. The same herb could be medicine for one, ritual tool for another, and poison for a third. Even the brewing of beer was affected. Prior to the widespread use of hops, small quantities of henbane or other psychoactive herbs were sometimes added to beer recipes to enhance medicinal effects or preserve the brew. Although eventually banned or replaced with safer alternatives, this practice illustrates the experimental and fluid nature of medieval pharmacology and culinary culture. Beer itself was a medium through which psychoactive herbs could be ingested, blurring the line between daily sustenance, medicine, and altered experience. In essence, the medieval world was a place where plants, fungi, and roots were both medicines and mysteries, tools and temptations. Henbane, Mandrake, and Belladonna were central to this landscape. Their effects were powerful, unpredictable, and culturally significant. They offered relief, inspiration, and sometimes disaster. They were woven into domestic life, temple rituals, medical practice, and folklore. The story of medieval intoxication is therefore not just about getting high. It's about human curiosity, experimentation, and adaptation. It's about the ways in which people interacted with their environment, sought relief from pain, and attempted to understand the unseen. Psychoactive herbs were practical, mystical, and occasionally recreational, but always dangerous. They demanded respect, knowledge, and caution. Modern pharmacology, neuroscience, and ethnobotany continue to uncover the sophistication behind these ancient practices. We now know the biochemical basis of henbane's sedative and hallucinogenic effects, mandrake's anesthetic properties, and belladonna's potency. Yet the cultural and ritual dimensions, how these substances were integrated into daily life, ceremonial practice, and social structure, remain equally compelling. In conclusion, the Middle Ages were a complex, experimental era, far removed from our simplified notions of mud, plague, and piety. Herbal intoxication, far from being fringe or rare, was embedded in medicine, spirituality, and daily survival. Plants like henbane, mandrake, and belladonna shaped culture, medicine, and folklore. They connected humanity to nature, the divine, and the unknown. And while modern society often separates medicine, recreation, and ritual, in medieval Europe, these spheres were intertwined, producing a world that was both hazardous and endlessly imaginative. From the humble gardens of peasants to the cloistered labs of monks, medieval herbalists pushed the boundaries of perception and medicine. Their work laid the foundation for modern pharmacology and continues to fascinate today. Every tincture, tea, and ointment carried the weight of experimentation, observation, and centuries of tradition. When we look back at henbane, mandrake, and belladonna, we are not just seeing dangerous plants. We are glimpsing the ingenuity, courage, and curiosity of a people who navigated a world without modern safety nets, where every experiment could bring enlightenment or peril. Let's dive back into the curious, chaotic, and occasionally lethal world of medieval intoxication, a world that was equal parts herbal pharmacology, superstition, and adventure. In the Middle Ages, the line between medicine, magic, and recreational experimentation was not just blurry. It was practically invisible. The plants, roots, and concoctions people used had both practical and mystical purposes, and the results could be unpredictable, transformative, or deadly. Take, for example, the infamous mandrake, Mandragora officinarum. This root, often gnarled and humanoid in shape, was one of the most powerful and feared herbs in the medieval repertoire. Harvesting a mandrake was a task fraught with danger, or so the folklore suggested. Legends insisted that the root screamed when pulled from the ground, and anyone who heard that scream would die instantly. This created some extremely creative, if morally questionable, harvesting techniques. One of the most common involved tying the root to a dog, prompting the animal to dig it up while the human stayed safely at a distance, avoiding the lethal wail. Ethical concerns aside, this practice underscores the lengths to which people were willing to go to harness the mandrake's power. Once harvested, the root could be dried, powdered, steeped, or even carried as a talisman. Tiny mandrake figures, stuffed into pouches, were thought to ward off evil or enhance fertility, a rather macabre but popular form of ancient jewelry and magic charm. Of course, the church didn't look kindly on mandrake. Any substance capable of producing visions without direct divine sanction was treated with suspicion, often labeled as witchcraft adjacent. Yet despite ecclesiastical disapproval, monks carefully recorded mandrake recipes, often with meticulous instructions. Used correctly, mandrake could dull surgical pain, induce sleep, and provoke vivid, sometimes prophetic dreams. Used incorrectly, it could lead to vomiting, unconsciousness, or a full-blown family exorcism after someone began believing their dinner was whispering secrets to them. Then there was the deadly allure of belladonna, or deadly nightshade, Atropa belladonna, whose name alone suggests danger. Belladonna was a botanical cocktail of beauty, hallucination, and lethal potential. The plant's Latin name, beautiful lady, came from its cosmetic use. A few drops of belladonna extract in the eyes would dilate the pupils, creating the appearance of wide, mysterious, and alluring eyes. Beauty came at a steep price, however, including blurred vision, extreme light sensitivity, and in some cases, accidental poisoning. Belladonna was far from being a mere cosmetic. It was used medicinally as a painkiller, sedative, and sometimes a crude truth serum, though the results often produced incomprehensible or humorous confessions rather than genuine revelations. The plant contains atropine and scopolamine, compounds that disrupt neurotransmitters in the nervous system, producing effects ranging from mild euphoria to full-blown hallucinations where walls might appear to ripple and ordinary objects seem to breathe. In addition to medicinal use, belladonna, henbane, and mandrake were key ingredients in the infamous flying ointments. These salves, typically made with animal fat as a base, were applied topically to the skin, specifically targeting areas with high absorption via mucous membranes. The ointments were designed to produce euphoric, hallucinogenic experiences, sometimes described as flying through the night sky. Users reported visions of attending satanic feasts, soaring over villages, or experiencing transcendental journeys that could just as easily end in confusion, injury, or embarrassing awakenings in haystacks. The connection between these ointments and broomsticks, a now iconic symbol of witches, was practical rather than fantastical. Broom handles, or similar staffs, were often used to apply the ointments to hard-to-reach areas, leveraging the plant's transdermal absorption properties. This method allowed users to experience hallucinatory flight without ingesting deadly amounts of toxic plant matter. While the church viewed these activities as evidence of demonic consorting, in reality, the experiences were chemically induced, often dangerously so, and rarely as glamorous as folklore suggests. But the Middle Ages were not the only part of the world experimenting with mind-altering substances. To the south and east, in the flourishing cities of the Islamic Golden Age, hashish emerged as a sophisticated, culturally embedded psychoactive substance. Derived from cannabis resin, hashish was consumed across Persia, Egypt, and the Levant. Unlike Europe's haphazard ointments and bitter teas, hashish was typically ingested orally, often mixed with honey, spices, or other flavorful ingredients, making it palatable, if potent. Hashish was not purely recreational. In Sufi traditions, it was believed to aid spiritual insight, help dissolve the ego, and encourage deep contemplation. Poets, philosophers, and mystics documented its effects with remarkable precision, treating it as a tool for intellectual and spiritual exploration. Literary references to hashish are abundant, often expressed with a mixture of awe, poetic metaphor, and humor, reflecting its ability to inspire both creative insight and mind-altering visions. Usage of hashish was not without controversy. Authorities periodically attempted to ban it, fearing moral decay or laziness among the populace. Nevertheless, it persisted, integrated into medicine, ritual, and culture. Even the legendary assassins, a secretive medieval sect, were reputed to use hashish to psych themselves into readiness before missions, highlighting the substance's role in both practical and ritualized preparation for extraordinary tasks. Returning to Europe, the broader medieval pharmacopoeia was vast and experimental. Apothecaries, wandering quacks, and monasteries alike mixed potions, tinctures, and elixirs from henbane, mandrake, belladonna, poppy, and dozens of other botanicals. These substances could sedate, hallucinate, or even mimic death-like states for theatrical, religious, or medical purposes. Recipes were often vague, relying on practitioner intuition and oral tradition. Dosage miscalculations could be catastrophic, which is why medieval medicine often doubled as a gamble with life and sanity. Flying ointments, for instance, were often combined with animal fats and a precise, almost ritualized counterclockwise stirring under moonlight. The goal was to create a powerful, transdermally absorbed hallucinogen. Applied carefully, it produced intense visionary experiences. Applied incorrectly, it could cause delirium, vomiting, or worse. The preparation and administration of these ointments required both botanical knowledge and nerve, a reflection of how intertwined pharmacology and superstition were at the time. Potions were similarly versatile. Henbane or belladonna could be brewed into teas, infused in wine, or combined with poppy extract for pain relief during surgical procedures. Some elixirs were marketed by wandering herbalists promising cures for everything from insomnia to heartbreak. The unpredictability of these concoctions was both feared and celebrated. One dose might produce peaceful slumber or divine visions. The next might result in screaming fits, hallucinations, or spiritual panic. The medieval pharmacopoeia was as much about experimentation and personal experience as it was about empirical science. Social context also shaped the use of these substances. Noble women, for example, sometimes used belladonna cosmetically or socially, while monks or physicians applied mandrake for medical purposes. Peasants, often untrained and relying on oral tradition, risked accidental ingestion with potentially fatal consequences. Across Europe, knowledge of toxic and psychoactive plants existed alongside folklore, mysticism, and early medicine, a reflection of a society negotiating the boundary between nature, culture, and the divine. Importantly, these plants and preparations were not isolated phenomena. They were part of a broader European and Mediterranean tradition of exploring consciousness, relieving pain, and interacting with the unknown. While dangerous, these substances demonstrate an early empirical approach to pharmacology, observation, experimentation, and documentation, even if mixed with superstition, ritual, and moral panic. The interplay between medieval European practices and the sophisticated uses in the Islamic world also highlights how context and culture shape substance use. In Europe, toxic ointments and hallucinogens were applied topically or ingested with high risk. In the Islamic Golden Age, substances like hashish were incorporated into culinary, spiritual, and medicinal traditions with documented effects and cultural guidelines. Both approaches reflect human ingenuity and curiosity, adapted to local resources, beliefs, and social structures. Meanwhile, these substances shaped folklore, literature, and culture. Stories of mandrake screams, witches flying on broomsticks, and hallucinations induced by belladonna or henbane persisted for centuries, blending fact and legend. Such tales were warnings, entertainment, and instruction, reflecting society's understanding and fear of psychoactive power. Even when misused, these plants left an indelible mark on culture, medicine, and spiritual life. Thus, the Middle Ages were not merely a period of superstition and poverty. They were a time of botanical exploration, risky experimentation, and a blending of science, ritual, and imagination. Plants like Henbane, Mandrake, and Belladonna were central to this world. Their application ranged from medicinal and ritualistic to recreational or accidental. They shaped the human experience of pain, pleasure, and perception, and they reflect a culture deeply engaged with the natural world and its mysteries. Even the most notorious practices, flying ointments, transdermal application, and ritual ingestion, reveal a sophisticated understanding of human physiology and chemistry, despite the absence of modern scientific tools. Practitioners were careful observers, documenting effects and refining methods over generations. What survives today in folklore, literature, and herbals is a window into a world where the boundaries between magic, medicine, and intoxication were fluid, experimental, and profoundly human. In conclusion, medieval intoxicants, whether mandrake, belladonna, henbane, or hashish, were more than recreational substances. They were integral to medicine, ritual, and cultural identity. Their use demonstrates an early form of pharmacology combined with spirituality, curiosity, and creativity. They were tools, experiments, and sometimes weapons, shaping not only the lives of individuals, but also the culture and folklore of an era. The Middle Ages, contrary to popular stereotypes, were alive with innovation, risk, and exploration of consciousness, albeit often one potentially lethal potion at a time. Even as Europe experimented with toxic ointments and hallucinogenic roots, the Islamic world refined the culinary and spiritual use of psychoactive substances like hashish. Both traditions illustrate humanity's enduring quest to manipulate perception, relieve pain, and explore the boundaries of consciousness. Across continents and cultures, these practices reveal an early, intertwined history of pharmacology, ritual, and imagination, a legacy that continues to fascinate and inform modern understandings of human interaction with mind-altering plants. The medieval world was intoxicating, literally. While we often imagine it as a grim parade of stone walls, mud, and plagues, beneath that austere exterior, life was full of experimentation, risk, and ingenuity. People had a persistent, often fearless curiosity for mind-altering substances, whether for medicinal, spiritual, or recreational purposes. They explored the effects of plants, fungi, resins, and even honey in ways that were sometimes lethal, sometimes visionary, but always fascinating. Take cannabis, for example. Today, the plant has its place in recreational and medicinal culture, but in the Middle Ages, its use was shrouded in mystery and suspicion. While hashish and cannabis-based products were widely employed in parts of the Islamic world, Europe lagged far behind. Here, experimentation with cannabis often ended in fire, accidental poisoning, or general alarm, devil grass, some called it. Yet across the Mediterranean and Middle East, it was already entwined with both ritual and intellectual inquiry. Scholars, mystics, and herbalists documented its effects meticulously, in sharp contrast to Europe's haphazard approach. Meanwhile, in European churches, incense wafted through the air with a dual purpose, the pious and the psychoactive. Picture a medieval cathedral with its flickering candles, colored glass filtering golden light, and thick, aromatic smoke curling toward the heavens. While worshippers credited the incense for elevating their spirits, some of the effect was probably chemical. Frankincense and myrrh, imported from Arabia and East Africa, were burned to purify, scent, and impress, but the compounds they released, particularly central acetate, can affect the brain's limbic system. In poorly ventilated chapels, inhaling these fumes, especially during long services with fasting or dehydration, could produce mild euphoria, lightheadedness, or even hallucinatory visions. Perhaps some saints' apparitions or prophetic insights owed their origin to chemical fog rather than divine intervention. Incense was far from exclusive to Christianity. Mosques, synagogues, Buddhist temples, and pre-Christian pagan rites all embraced aromatic resins, showing that humans have long been drawn to scents that alter perception. In many ways, incense functioned as the medieval equivalent of ambient chill music. It smoothed the harsh edges of reality and softened the tedium of long prayers or sermons. While pious intent was paramount, the side effect of mild intoxication cannot be discounted. Beyond smoke and resins, the medieval population relied heavily on alcohol for both survival and pleasure. Clean water was a rarity, often contaminated or downstream from livestock, making even small sips a health risk. Brewing a low-alcohol beverage, commonly known as small beer, was a practical solution. Produced by housewives or local brewers, this drink was designed for hydration, nourishment, and mild intoxication rather than excess. Adults and children alike consumed it daily. For those of higher social standing or with more leisure time, stronger beverages were available. Honey meads, spiced wines, and imported vintages offered both flavor and a stronger kick. Monasteries became hubs of brewing innovation. Monks documented fermentation techniques with meticulous care, tasting and perfecting recipes while considering both medicinal and spiritual effects. Ale and wine were not mere luxuries. They were integral to health, social cohesion, and even salvation. Alcohol also shaped medieval entertainment and culture. Taverns and alehouses served as gathering spaces for celebration, mourning, gossip, and the invention of new dances. Drinking was rarely a conscious decision to get high. For many, it was breakfast, medicine, and daily sustenance rolled into one. But intoxication in the Middle Ages was not limited to alcohol. Other substances, some accidental and some deliberate, expanded the human experience in ways that ranged from mildly amusing to terrifying. Enter ergot, a parasitic fungus that infests rye and other cereal grains. To the medieval eye, it was an odd, dark growth on otherwise ordinary bread ingredients. To the human body, it was a biochemical prank capable of convulsions, hallucinations, burning limbs, and sensations of transformation. When consumed, ergot could trigger what modern scholars describe as the original psychedelic experiences, centuries before LSD or the Summer of Love. Entire villages unwittingly ingested ergot-laden loaves, particularly in colder, damp regions like France and the Germanic territories. Hunger outweighed caution, and the consequences could be spectacular. Ergotism manifested in two main forms. Convulsive ergotism produced muscle spasms, seizures, hallucinations, and uncontrollable movements, often accompanied by fits of laughter or panic. Gangrenous ergotism restricted blood flow, causing extremities to blacken, shrivel, and fall off. Victims of ergot outbreaks sometimes engaged in bizarre public behavior, including dancing plagues, where people danced for days on end, occasionally to the point of death. Medieval explanations ranged from divine punishment to demonic possession, though modern science points to accidental fungal intoxication. Treatment often involved dietary intervention, such as feeding patients wheat instead of rye, a solution that seemed simple yet effective. The hallucinatory effects of ergot may have extended beyond Europe. Some scholars speculate that ergot could have contributed to the paranoia and visions associated with events like the Salem witch trials, though the evidence remains debated. Regardless, the phenomenon demonstrates that medieval Europe had its own chemically induced trips long before the advent of modern psychedelics. While ergot was unintentional, other substances were deliberately sought for their psychoactive effects. Mad honey, produced by bees feeding on rhododendron flowers in the Black Sea region, provided dizziness, hallucinations, vomiting, slowed heart rate, and visionary experiences. Consumed in small doses, it offered mild euphoria. In larger amounts, it could incapacitate an army. Historical accounts describe invading troops being poisoned by abandoned villages' stores of mad honey, highlighting its potential as both a medicinal and strategic tool. Mad honey was traded, consumed for visions, and used in folk healing, demonstrating that medieval humans were eager experimenters, even when the substances involved could be deadly. In parallel to accidental or recreational intoxication, semi-legitimate practitioners, shamans, cunning folk, herbalists, served as community wellness guides. These individuals were often women, midwives, wise women, or healers who possessed deep botanical knowledge passed down through generations. Without formal training or written credentials, they understood how to harness the powers of Mandrake, Belladonna, Henbane, poppy, and other psychoactive plants. Their preparations were versatile, mixed with wine, honey, fat, or saliva, and often accompanied by incantations, prayers, or ritual gestures. The same concoction could heal, induce visions, or provoke involuntary confessions, demonstrating the precarious balance between medicine, magic, and misadventure. The social role of these practitioners was essential yet precarious. They served as the first line of defense against illness, pain, or spiritual misfortune. Communities relied on their expertise when doctors recommended bloodletting or when priests invoked exorcisms. Yet their power and independence made them suspect in the eyes of authority figures. Accidents, hallucinations, or the unintended death of a patient could swiftly be attributed to witchcraft. Despite this, these herbalists were indispensable, often navigating legal and ecclesiastical scrutiny while providing critical care. The substances they wielded reflected a deep understanding of botany, pharmacology, and chemistry, even without microscopes or chemical theory. Mandrake could sedate, provoke visions, or induce unconsciousness. Belladonna dilated pupils, dulled pain, or caused hallucinations. Henbane induced euphoria, trance states, or delirium. Applied topically, brewed in wine, or ingested in teas, these substances could expand consciousness, alleviate suffering, or simply produce a wild experience. Dosage and preparation were everything. A few grams too much could lead to convulsions, vomiting, or death. Yet careful application produced mystical, medical, or recreational effects, demonstrating remarkable empirical knowledge. Even more exotic experiences were facilitated through elaborate applications. Flying ointments, for example, involved mixing henbane, mandrake, and belladonna with animal fats, applied transdermally to maximize absorption through mucous membranes. Accounts describe practitioners experiencing sensations of flight, attending nocturnal feasts with supernatural entities, or transcending ordinary reality. These experiences blurred the lines between spirituality, medicine, and intoxication. Contemporary observers often interpreted them as consorting with demons, though chemical hallucinogens were the real cause. Alcohol, incense, fungal intoxication, psychoactive honey, and herbal potions together created a tapestry of sensory, medicinal, and mystical experiences. Life in medieval Europe was intertwined with substances that altered perception. Survival, spiritual practice, socialization, and experimentation all intersected in the use of intoxicants. Consumption was ubiquitous, yet contextual. The effects depended on social rank, location, ritual, and intention. Beer and small ale were everyday staples. Mandrake, belladonna, and henbane were sophisticated tools of healing, ritual, or risk. Ergot and mad honey were accidental or strategic agents of chaos. The knowledge surrounding these substances was often oral, communal, and adaptive. Practitioners observed results, refined techniques, and passed insights to the next generation. Mistakes were lethal, discoveries enlightening. This period highlights humanity's enduring fascination with mind-altering substances and its creative, sometimes reckless experimentation with nature's chemical bounty. In summary, medieval Europe and neighboring regions were a laboratory of human curiosity, herbal knowledge, and psychoactive exploration. Cannabis, incense, alcohol, ergot, mad honey, mandrake, belladonna, and henbane were central players in a complex interplay of culture, medicine, ritual, and recreation. Communities depended on both formal and informal expertise to harness these substances safely. or at least more safely than mere chance would allow. Women, shamans, midwives, and cunning folk were critical conduits of this knowledge, blending observation, tradition, and experimentation. The clergy, physicians, and local authorities oscillated between oversight, suspicion, and fascination. Mistakes were attributed to magic, misfortune, or divine wrath, while successes were celebrated or ritualized. Across Europe, the Middle East, and beyond, humans engaged creatively with mind-altering substances, laying foundations for pharmacology, spiritual practice, and the cultural history of intoxication. Ultimately, the Middle Ages were not just about survival, piety, and plague. They were an era of chemical curiosity, empirical experimentation, and a delicate balancing act between life, death, and hallucination. The legacy of medieval intoxicants, accidental, ritualized, and deliberate, remains visible today, whether in folk medicine, literature, or the historical understanding of human interaction with mind-altering substances. From incense clouds to mad honey, from flying ointments to ergot-laced bread, the Middle Ages were intoxicating in every sense, a time when the boundary between reality and perception was both explored and, occasionally, catastrophically tested. Let's dive back into the curious, chaotic, and occasionally lethal world of medieval intoxication, a world that was equal parts herbal pharmacology, superstition, and adventure. In the Middle Ages, the line between medicine, magic, and recreational experimentation was not just blurry, it was practically invisible. The plants, roots, and concoctions people used had both practical and mystical purposes, and the results could be unpredictable, transformative, or deadly. Take, for example, the infamous mandrake, Mandragora officinarum. This root, often gnarled and humanoid in shape, was one of the most powerful and feared herbs in the medieval repertoire. Harvesting a mandrake was a task fraught with danger, or so the folklore suggested. Legends insisted that the root screamed when pulled from the ground, and anyone who heard that scream would die instantly. This created some extremely creative, if morally questionable, harvesting techniques. One of the most common involved tying the root to a dog, prompting the animal to dig it up while the human stayed safely at a distance, avoiding the lethal wail. Ethical concerns aside, this practice underscores the lengths to which people were willing to go to harness the mandrake's power. Once harvested, the root could be dried, powdered, steeped, or even carried as a talisman. Tiny mandrake figures, stuffed into pouches, were thought to ward off evil or enhance fertility, a rather macabre but popular form of ancient jewelry and magic charm. Of course, the church didn't look kindly on mandrake. Any substance capable of producing visions without direct divine sanction was treated with suspicion, often labeled as witchcraft adjacent. Yet despite ecclesiastical disapproval, monks carefully recorded mandrake recipes, often with meticulous instructions. Used correctly, mandrake could dull surgical pain, induce sleep, and provoke vivid, sometimes prophetic dreams. Used incorrectly, it could lead to vomiting, unconsciousness, or a full-blown family exorcism after someone began believing their dinner was whispering secrets to them. Then there was the deadly allure of belladonna, or deadly nightshade, Atropa belladonna, whose name alone suggests danger. Belladonna was a botanical cocktail of beauty, hallucination, and lethal potential. The plant's Latin name, beautiful lady, came from its cosmetic use. A few drops of belladonna extract in the eyes would dilate the pupils, creating the appearance of wide, mysterious, and alluring eyes. Beauty came at a steep price, however, including blurred vision, extreme light sensitivity, and in some cases, accidental poisoning. Belladonna was far from being a mere cosmetic. It was used medicinally as a painkiller, sedative, and sometimes a crude truth serum, though the results often produced incomprehensible or humorous confessions rather than genuine revelations. The plant contains atropine and scopolamine, compounds that disrupt neurotransmitters in the nervous system, producing effects ranging from mild euphoria to full-blown hallucinations where walls might appear to ripple and ordinary objects seem to breathe. In addition to medicinal use, belladonna, henbane, and mandrake were key ingredients in the infamous flying ointments. These salves, typically made with animal fat as a base, were applied topically to the skin, specifically targeting areas with high absorption via mucous membranes. The ointments were designed to produce euphoric, hallucinogenic experiences, sometimes described as flying through the night sky. Users reported visions of attending satanic feasts, soaring over villages, or experiencing transcendental journeys that could just as easily end in confusion, injury, or embarrassing awakenings in haystacks. The connection between these ointments and broomsticks, a now iconic symbol of witches, was practical rather than fantastical. Broom handles, or similar staffs, were often used to apply the ointments to hard-to-reach areas, leveraging the plant's transdermal absorption properties. This method allowed users to experience hallucinatory flight without ingesting deadly amounts of toxic plant matter. While the church viewed these activities as evidence of demonic consorting, in reality, the experiences were chemically induced, often dangerously so, and rarely as glamorous as folklore suggests. But the Middle Ages were not the only part of the world experimenting with mind-altering substances. To the south and east, in the flourishing cities of the Islamic Golden Age, hashish emerged as a sophisticated, culturally embedded psychoactive substance. Derived from cannabis resin, hashish was consumed across Persia, Egypt, and the Levant. Unlike Europe's haphazard ointments and bitter teas, hashish was typically ingested orally, often mixed with honey, spices, or other flavorful ingredients, making it palatable, if potent. Hashish was not purely recreational. In Sufi traditions, it was believed to aid spiritual insight, help dissolve the ego, and encourage deep contemplation. Poets, philosophers, and mystics documented its effects with remarkable precision, treating it as a tool for intellectual and spiritual exploration. Literary references to hashish are abundant, often expressed with a mixture of awe, poetic metaphor, and humor, reflecting its ability to inspire both creative insight and mind-altering visions. Usage of hashish was not without controversy. Authorities periodically attempted to ban it, fearing moral decay or laziness among the populace. Nevertheless, it persisted, integrated into medicine, ritual, and culture. Even the legendary assassins, a secretive medieval sect, were reputed to use hashish to psych themselves into readiness before missions, highlighting the substance's role in both practical and ritualized preparation for extraordinary tasks. Returning to Europe, the broader medieval pharmacopoeia was vast and experimental. Apothecaries, wandering quacks, and monasteries alike mixed potions, tinctures, and elixirs from henbane, mandrake, belladonna, poppy, and dozens of other botanicals. These substances could sedate, hallucinate, or even mimic death-like states for theatrical, religious, or medical purposes. Recipes were often vague, relying on practitioner intuition and oral tradition. Dosage miscalculations could be catastrophic, which is why medieval medicine often doubled as a gamble with life and sanity. Flying ointments, for instance, were often combined with animal fats and a precise, almost ritualized counterclockwise stirring under moonlight. The goal was to create a powerful, transdermally absorbed hallucinogen. Applied carefully, it produced intense visionary experiences. Applied incorrectly, it could cause delirium, vomiting, or worse. The preparation and administration of these ointments required both botanical knowledge and nerve, a reflection of how intertwined pharmacology and superstition were at the time. Potions were similarly versatile. Henbane or belladonna could be brewed into teas, infused in wine, or combined with poppy extract for pain relief during surgical procedures. Some elixirs were marketed by wandering herbalists promising cures for everything from insomnia to heartbreak. The unpredictability of these concoctions was both feared and celebrated. One dose might produce peaceful slumber or divine visions. The next might result in screaming fits, hallucinations, or spiritual panic. The medieval pharmacopoeia was as much about experimentation and personal experience as it was about empirical science. Social context also shaped the use of these substances. Noble women, for example, sometimes used belladonna cosmetically or socially, while monks or physicians applied mandrake for medical purposes. Peasants, often untrained and relying on oral tradition, risked accidental ingestion with potentially fatal consequences. Across Europe, knowledge of toxic and psychoactive plants existed alongside folklore, mysticism, and early medicine, a reflection of a society negotiating the boundary between nature, culture, and the divine. Importantly, these plants and preparations were not isolated phenomena. They were part of a broader European and Mediterranean tradition of exploring consciousness, relieving pain, and interacting with the unknown. While dangerous, these substances demonstrate an early empirical approach to pharmacology, observation, experimentation, and documentation, even if mixed with superstition, ritual, and moral panic. The interplay between medieval European practices and the sophisticated uses in the Islamic world also highlights how context and culture shape substance use. In Europe, toxic ointments and hallucinogens were applied topically or ingested with high risk. In the Islamic Golden Age, substances like hashish were incorporated into culinary, spiritual, and medicinal traditions with documented effects and cultural guidelines. Both approaches reflect human ingenuity and curiosity, adapted to local resources, beliefs, and social structures. Meanwhile, these substances shaped folklore, literature, and culture. Stories of mandrake screams, witches flying on broomsticks, and hallucinations induced by belladonna or henbane persisted for centuries, blending fact and legend. Such tales were warnings, entertainment, and instruction, reflecting society's understanding and fear of psychoactive power. Even when misused, these plants left an indelible mark on culture, medicine, and spiritual life. Thus, the Middle Ages were not merely a period of superstition and poverty. They were a time of botanical exploration, risky experimentation, and a blending of science, ritual, and imagination. Plants like henbane, mandrake, and belladonna were central to this world. Their application ranged from medicinal and ritualistic to recreational or accidental. They shaped the human experience of pain, pleasure, and perception, and they reflect a culture deeply engaged with the natural world and its mysteries. Even the most notorious practices, flying ointments, transdermal application, and ritual ingestion, reveal a sophisticated understanding of human physiology and chemistry, despite the absence of modern scientific tools. Practitioners were careful observers, documenting effects and refining methods over generations. What survives today in folklore, literature, and herbals is a window into a world where the boundaries between magic, medicine, and intoxication were fluid, experimental, and profoundly human. In conclusion, medieval intoxicants, whether mandrake, belladonna, henbane, or hashish, were more than recreational substances. They were integral to medicine, ritual, and cultural identity. Their use demonstrates an early form of pharmacology combined with spirituality, curiosity, and creativity. They were tools, experiments, and sometimes weapons, shaping not only the lives of individuals, but also the culture and folklore of an era. The Middle Ages, contrary to popular stereotypes, were alive with innovation, risk, and exploration of consciousness, albeit often one potentially lethal potion at a time. Even as Europe experimented with toxic ointments and hallucinogenic roots, the Islamic world refined the culinary and spiritual use of psychoactive substances like hashish. Both traditions illustrate humanity's enduring quest to manipulate perception, relieve pain, and explore the boundaries of consciousness. Across continents and cultures, these practices reveal an early, intertwined history of pharmacology, ritual, and imagination, a legacy that continues to fascinate and inform modern understandings of human interaction with mind-altering plants. One pressing question lingers whenever we dive into the intoxicating world of medieval substances. How did the people of the Middle Ages actually feel about getting high? The answer is complicated, contradictory, and, at times, downright hilarious. Opinions depended heavily on social role, intent, and circumstance. For herbalists, healers, and midwives, mind-altering plants and concoctions were tools, practical, medicinal, and indispensable. If a patient's pain dulled, a fever eased, or childbirth became just a fraction less terrifying, the minor hallucinations or odd behaviors were mere side effects. Reciting psalms backward, swearing at invisible spirits, or conversing with a cat in French wasn't a failure. It was just part of the process. Medicine often came with unexpected surprises. The mystical and spiritual communities viewed altered consciousness through a different lens. Monks, mystics, and vision-seeking individuals regarded hallucinations as revelations, visions as divine messages. A temporary loss of normal perception wasn't alarming. It was an invitation to insight. Staring into the void and receiving a cryptic reply in Latin might signify a divine calling or, at the very least, a mural dedicated to your piety. Context mattered immensely. If your high was the result of spiritual seeking, it was acceptable. If it was merely recreational, or worse, socially disruptive, then the church took notice. The lines between miracle and misdemeanor were thin and often enforced with vigorous eyebrows. Saints could experience visions. Peasants, perhaps, just had a bad trip. Among the common folk, the approach was more relaxed. A neighbor's sleeping potion might double as a psychedelic nightcap. Poppy wine, hashish, or other botanical remedies were simply part of daily life, tools for easing pain or calming nerves, not acts of rebellion or heresy. The everyday experience of altered states was integrated seamlessly into the domestic and medical fabric of the medieval home. It all depended on who you were, what you used, and whether anyone in authority noticed or decided to notice. This blend of practical, spiritual, and recreational use created a fascinating cultural gray zone. Altered states existed at the intersection of health, religion, and personal indulgence. In a world full of plagues, famine, and divine judgment, a little herbal escape was hardly the worst idea. Life was chaotic, so why not introduce a measure of chemical curiosity? From the land of hallucinatory bread and enchanted herbs, we shift our gaze to another realm. The seas, which were no less treacherous or essential to medieval civilization than any fungus or visionary root. To command the seas was to command the flow of wealth, grain, armies, and messages. Civilizations such as Athens, Carthage, and Egypt understood that naval supremacy wasn't optional, it was existential. Without control of the water, cities risked isolation, starvation, and vulnerability to siege. With it, empires could project power, protect trade, and assert influence far beyond their land borders. The Mediterranean, often called the Middle Sea, exemplified this principle. It connected countless civilizations, facilitating commerce, cultural exchange, and conflict. Whoever dominated the waves could exert influence over trade routes, levy tributes, and impose strategic will across continents. Naval power was as much about logistics and communication as it was about brute force. Cities that failed to maintain a strong fleet often fell to isolation or economic stagnation. Those that mastered the waters could thrive, expanding their influence, projecting their military might, and controlling critical resources. Athens provides a striking example. In the classical era, the city invested heavily in naval infrastructure, from harbors and shipyards to a system of naval financing funded by citizens. The trireme, a sleek, multi-tiered warship, became the backbone of the Athenian fleet, enabling unprecedented strategic flexibility. Unlike land-based armies, which were constrained by terrain, navies could exploit maneuverability, positioning, and speed. Control of the waves meant dictating the flow of the conflict and, by extension, the destiny of the city-state. The trireme was a marvel of design and human coordination. Measuring approximately 120 feet long and just 18 feet wide, its narrow hull allowed for speed and agility, while the low draft enabled coastal operations. Its defining feature was its 3 rows of oars, stacked vertically, manned by trained rowers whose coordination determined the vessel's effectiveness. In battle, the oars propelled the trireme to speeds of up to 9 knots, allowing it to ram, evade, or flank enemies with remarkable precision. The primary weapon of the trireme was its bronze-sheathed ram at the prow. A well-executed strike could pierce the hull of an enemy ship, sending it to the bottom in minutes. But success required more than brute force. Precise timing, angle, and coordination were essential. Too steep an impact, and the attacking ship could lodge into its target or capsize. Captains spent years mastering these maneuvers, including the infamous déclisse and periplus, complex naval tactics designed to exploit gaps in enemy formations and strike exposed flanks. Each trireme also carried a contingent of marines, typically 10 to 20 hoplites and a few archers. Their role was defensive and offensive, to repel boarders, protect the vessel, or seize enemy ships once lines collided. Boarding actions were brutal, intimate, and chaotic, often resembling land-based melee combat more than naval skirmishes. Archers and slingers provided ranged support from elevated positions, targeting enemy combatants in a deadly ballet of coordinated chaos. Rome, recognizing the limitations of its seamanship, adapted tactics to leverage its strengths. During the First Punic War, Roman forces employed the corvus, a boarding device with a spike that allowed soldiers to storm enemy ships, transforming naval encounters into floating land battles. Where skill at sea was lacking, sheer infantry prowess compensated. These tactics were effective but bloody, turning battles into close-quarters carnage with no opportunity for retreat once boarding began. Fire, another tool of naval warfare, added a terrifying dimension. Fire ships, loaded with flammable materials, tar, pitch, or oil, could wreak havoc among tightly packed enemy formations. The technique was as dangerous to the user as the target, demanding precision timing and wind awareness. Historical accounts, including the Greco-Persian conflicts, document desperate defenders using flaming rafts to disrupt naval invasions. In confined harbors and straits, a single fire ship could ignite multiple vessels, creating chaos and panic. Returning to the human side of medieval experience, the cultural attitudes toward mind-altering substances were equally complex. Some hallucinogenic plants, like Mandrake, Belladonna, and Henbane, were celebrated for their medicinal and spiritual effects. Applied in ointments, ingested in teas or wines, or used in ritual contexts, these substances could produce visions, ease pain, or facilitate trance states. Intent and social role determined the moral framing of intoxication. When aligned with healing or divine pursuit, it was sanctioned. When used frivolously or mischievously, it risked suspicion or persecution. The clergy and authorities often intervened, particularly when the consequences were socially disruptive. Loss of control, erratic behavior, or confessions under hallucinatory influence could be interpreted as heresy or possession. Saints could receive divine visions. Peasants were often assumed possessed. Among the general population, however, a more relaxed pragmatism prevailed. Herbal remedies doubled as medicines and mild psychoactive tools. Consumption was integrated into domestic life. A touch of poppy wine for pain relief, a sip of hashish for calm, or a cautious taste of mandrake for prophetic dreams. Communities also relied on local herbalists and wise women, who acted as unlicensed pharmacists, spiritual guides, and counselors. Their remedies reflected deep empirical knowledge of botany and chemistry, even if encoded in folklore and ritual. They understood which plants to grind, which roots to steep, and the exact dosage to achieve desired effects. Mistakes were risky, hallucinations, poisoning, or death, but the benefits of correct preparation could be profound. These practitioners were often women, midwives, or elders, whose authority derived from experience and trust rather than formal training. In practice, the medieval attitude toward intoxication, whether through alcohol, herbs, or fungi, was pragmatic, variable, and deeply context-dependent. Substances were judged by their effects, their intent, and their social framing. While authorities oscillated between fascination, suspicion, and condemnation, the population incorporated psychoactive experiences into medicine, ritual, and daily life. Altered states occupied a gray area between miracle and misdemeanor, health and heresy, a reflection of the broader medieval worldview, where demons, saints, famine, and fortune intertwined. Similarly, mastery of the seas demanded coordination, skill, and knowledge, paralleling the complexities of medieval pharmacology and herbalism. Just as altered substances required careful preparation and social awareness, naval power depended on design, training, and strategy. The trireme exemplified this, a technological and social marvel that combined human labor, tactical precision, and engineering ingenuity. Each vessel was a floating laboratory of coordination, where timing, rhythm, and skill dictated survival. The trireme's speed, agility, and offensive potential through ramming allowed civilizations like Athens to assert dominance, protect trade routes, and influence political outcomes. Naval victories were often collective achievements. In Athens, rowers included citizens of all social classes, introducing a democratic dimension to military success. Similarly, fire ships, boarding actions, and corvus-assisted tactics highlighted adaptation and innovation in response to challenges at sea. Every naval maneuver required careful observation, planning, and execution. Failure was catastrophic, success legendary. In both maritime warfare and psychoactive exploration, medieval humans balanced risk and reward, experimentation and tradition, chaos and control. Across the seas and in domestic homes, life was shaped by mastery, observation, and human ingenuity. Where one group perfected the ramming attack, another mastered the delicate art of dosage. Where captains calculated the approach of a hostile fleet, herbalists measured roots, resins, and tinctures. Both worlds demanded knowledge, foresight, and courage. Ultimately, the Middle Ages were not simply an era of grim survival or rigid piety. They were a period of exploration, whether in altered consciousness or in naval dominance. Substances could heal, harm, or inspire. Ships could carry armies, merchants, or disaster. Mastery over either domain required insight, skill, and a willingness to embrace the unpredictable. Life was risky, often chaotic, and always fascinating. Humans navigated their inner worlds and the outer seas with equal intensity, blending pragmatism, creativity, and curiosity into a rich, complex civilization. Whether through hallucination or maritime mastery, the medieval mindset reveals a society comfortable with ambiguity, experimentation, and boldness. The lines between success and failure, reality and perception, control and chaos, were thin, and humans constantly tested their limits. The legacy is a testament to resilience, ingenuity, and the human desire to explore every frontier, whether within the mind or upon the waves. Naval warfare in the ancient world was a delicate balance of strategy, skill, and sheer courage. One of the most terrifying tactics was the use of fire at sea. A single flaming vessel could ignite panic, destroy enemy formations, and turn a disciplined fleet into chaos. Yet fire was a weapon of double-edged unpredictability. Winds shifted, smoke drifted the wrong way, and flames could easily backfire, consuming the attacker's own ships as quickly as the enemy's. For this reason, fire was employed sparingly, reserved for moments of desperation, blockades, surprise assaults, or last-ditch defenses where the risk justified the potential havoc. The pinnacle of ancient incendiary innovation emerged later with Greek fire, the formidable weapon developed by the Byzantine Empire. While Greek fire belongs more to the medieval period, its conceptual roots lie in earlier naval incendiary tactics. Unlike conventional fire ships, Greek fire could burn on water and was resistant to standard extinguishing methods, instilling terror into opposing sailors and often determining the outcome of naval encounters. But the psychological impact of fire in any form, ancient or medieval, cannot be overstated. A flaming ship approaching from the horizon, billowing smoke and sparks, could prompt even the most seasoned seamen to abandon their vessels in sheer panic. Long before Byzantine ingenuity, Egyptian and Phoenician fleets had already incorporated fire into naval tactics. Coastal defenders catapulted firepots and flaming arrows at intruding ships, especially during sieges, exploiting the terror and chaos that flames induced. Unlike conventional weapons, fire's unpredictability made it a psychological instrument as much as a physical threat. No barricade, wall, or phalanx could match the visceral horror of flames racing across wooden decks, consuming sails and rigging faster than any command could be executed. By the 5th century BCE, Athens exemplified the strategic use of maritime power to alter the fate of a city-state. The discovery of a massive silver vein in the Laurium mines provided the resources for Themistocles, a visionary Athenian politician, to propose an audacious plan: invest the newfound wealth not in personal luxury, but in naval expansion. His blueprint called for the construction of a formidable fleet of triremes, hundreds of fast, agile warships capable of transforming Athens from a modest land power into a maritime superpower. The city's silver became the keel of empire, and sweat, wood, and strategy became its backbone. The Athenian navy's decisive moment came at the Battle of Salamis in 480 BCE, where Themistocles lured the vastly superior Persian fleet into narrow straits. The confined space nullified the enemy's numerical advantage and allowed the nimble triremes to strike with precision. The result was a crushing victory that saved Athens from subjugation, cemented its reputation as a naval power, and laid the foundation for the Athenian Empire. The city's power no longer relied solely on hoplites or stone walls. It sailed on oars, discipline, and tactical brilliance. Athens' naval triumphs had profound social implications. The fleet democratized military service by enlisting even the poorest citizens as rowers on the triremes. Those without land, armor, or traditional combat roles now held influence, their contributions to naval campaigns granting them political clout in the Athenian assembly. Naval power, therefore, was not merely a weapon of war, but a mechanism of civic empowerment. The sea became a medium of social mobility as well as military dominance. However, Athens' reliance on naval supremacy carried inherent risks. Overdependence on the fleet, coupled with coercive policies toward allies, sowed seeds of resentment. During the Peloponnesian War, Sparta, traditionally a land-based power, capitalized on Persian financial support to build a fleet capable of challenging Athenian dominance. The climactic defeat at Aegospotami in 405 BC decimated Athens' navy, cutting off supply lines and forcing the city to surrender. Yet the legacy of Athens' maritime strategy endured. It demonstrated that mastery of the sea could compensate for limited territorial resources and transform a city-state into an imperial force. To the west, Carthage offers a contrasting example of maritime mastery, combining commercial acumen with naval innovation. Founded by Phoenician settlers around 800 BCE in modern Tunisia, Carthage rose to power through trade, seafaring, and advanced naval engineering rather than conquest alone. By the 4th century BCE, it had evolved into the hub of an extensive maritime network stretching from Spain to Sicily and North Africa to Sardinia. Carthaginian naval dominance relied on industrial-scale shipbuilding, sophisticated dockyards, and experienced crews. The city's circular harbors, unique in design, allowed for the rapid construction, repair, and deployment of fleets, ensuring readiness for both trade protection and military engagement. Carthaginian ships often favored heavier, more robust designs than Athenian triremes, prioritizing power and boarding potential over speed alone. Combined with a cadre of mercenary marines and Phoenician sailors deeply familiar with the seas, these vessels executed tactics emphasizing ramming, boarding, and the direct engagement of enemy vessels. Naval encounters were strategic, coordinated, and often decisive, showcasing Carthage's mastery of both engineering and seamanship. Trade reinforced Carthage's naval strength. Merchants navigated the Atlantic coasts of Europe and Africa, exchanging tin, silver, and exotic goods, while the navy safeguarded these lucrative routes from pirates, rivals, and emerging powers. Carthage's maritime dominance was both commercial and military, ensuring the city's prosperity and influence throughout the Mediterranean. The Punic Wars brought Carthage into direct conflict with Rome, which initially lacked significant naval capacity. The Romans, recognizing that subjugating Carthage required control of the sea, built a fleet virtually from scratch. Capturing a stranded Carthaginian quinquereme reportedly provided a blueprint for Roman shipbuilding. Within months, Rome produced hundreds of vessels, turning naval battles into extensions of their superior infantry tactics. To counter Carthage's seasoned crews, the Romans invented the corvus, a boarding bridge equipped with a spike that allowed Roman marines to board enemy ships. This innovation transformed naval encounters into land-style battles at sea, leveraging Rome's expertise in infantry combat to offset deficits in seamanship. The corvus was employed with dramatic effect in numerous engagements, allowing Rome to secure critical victories despite initial disadvantages. Despite Roman ingenuity, Carthage maintained its naval prowess through tactical mastery, conducting numerous successful engagements even when outnumbered. The city's fleets demonstrated strategic sophistication, executing maneuvers that destroyed enemy squadrons and maintained maritime dominance. However, Rome's persistence, disciplined supply lines, and sheer manpower eventually overwhelmed Carthage, culminating in the destruction of its fleet, the dismantling of shipyards, and the erosion of Carthaginian power by the end of the Second Punic War. The Egyptian approach to naval power offers another perspective, highlighting the use of waterways for both strategic and economic purposes. While pyramids and temples dominate our mental image of ancient Egypt, the Nile and the surrounding seas were critical arteries for maintaining the empire. Egyptian vessels, initially constructed from bundled papyrus reeds and later imported cedar, transported troops, goods, and monumental objects. Riverine and coastal control allowed Egypt to secure trade, project military power, and maintain internal cohesion over millennia. During the New Kingdom, Egypt developed seagoing fleets capable of challenging pirates and repelling external threats. Campaigns under pharaohs such as Thutmose III and Ramesses III against the Sea Peoples demonstrate the strategic deployment of warships, archers, and marines in combined operations. Egyptian naval architecture favored broad, sail-driven vessels with elevated fighting platforms, suited to coastal and riverine combat, where maneuverability was secondary to stability and firepower. Egypt's naval presence also underpinned economic stability. Grain exports to the Levant, trade with the Aegean, and security of ports like Byblos and Tanis relied on escort fleets. The protection of maritime routes ensured the empire's wealth and influence, with Egyptian shipbuilding techniques eventually sought after by foreign powers. Though later waves of foreign domination diminished Egyptian naval supremacy, the tradition established millennia of expertise in riverine and coastal operations, shaping the evolution of maritime strategy in the ancient Near East. Rome's rise to naval prominence illustrates a dramatic transformation. Initially a land-based power focused on infantry and road networks, Rome adapted rapidly when confronted by Carthaginian maritime dominance. At the outset of the First Punic War, Rome had almost no naval infrastructure. Confronted with the need to challenge Carthage, Rome constructed a fleet from captured and reverse-engineered vessels, employing the corvus to leverage its strength in disciplined infantry combat. These innovations allowed the Romans to overcome Carthage's superior experience, ultimately turning the Mediterranean into a theater where Roman persistence and strategic adaptation prevailed. Naval engagements in this era were a complex interplay of technology, tactics, and human coordination. Ramming, boarding, fire, and psychological warfare required skillful execution, situational awareness, and adaptability. Success depended on more than engineering. It demanded leadership, training, and the ability to exploit environmental conditions such as currents, wind, and confined waterways. Each battle reflected a combination of strategy, improvisation, and the human capacity to coordinate in high-stakes conditions. From the flames of fire ships to the precision of trireme ramming tactics. From Carthaginian mercenary crews to Egyptian riverine fleets, the ancient Mediterranean was a stage where naval mastery determined political power, economic dominance, and military success. Ships were more than vessels. They were instruments of policy, commerce, and social transformation. Athens' use of rowers to democratize the city, Carthage's integration of commerce and warfare, Egypt's logistical command over the Nile, and Rome's adaptive engineering all exemplified the multifaceted role of maritime power in shaping civilizations. In every case, the sea was more than a physical environment. It was a force that shaped history. Mastery of naval strategy allowed states to extend influence, control trade, and project power far beyond their borders. Equally, the inherent dangers of fire, weather, and human error meant that naval dominance required constant vigilance, innovation, and risk management. Ultimately, the ancient and medieval mastery of the seas demonstrates a convergence of engineering, strategy, and social organization. Just as Themistocles transformed silver into triremes and Athens into an empire, or the Romans converted captured ships into instruments of conquest, so too did naval power serve as a vehicle for innovation, resilience, and long-term influence. Across centuries, civilizations adapted to the dual challenge of mastering waterborne combat and safeguarding commerce, leaving a legacy of naval ingenuity that resonates through history. Rome's early ventures into naval warfare present a fascinating story of adaptation, innovation, and strategic determination. Initially, Roman sailors were relatively inexperienced, facing the battle-hardened crews of Carthage, who had dominated Mediterranean waters for centuries. Despite this disadvantage, Roman ingenuity and sheer aggression, coupled with the strategic use of the corvus, a boarding device designed to transform naval combat into a form of land battle, enabled them to achieve astonishing victories. The corvus, essentially a plank with a spike to hook onto enemy decks, allowed Roman soldiers to board Carthaginian vessels en masse, neutralizing Carthage's superior seamanship. For a brief period, it decisively altered the balance of naval power in Rome's favor. However, the corvus was not without its drawbacks. Its added weight made ships dangerously top-heavy, compromising stability in rough seas. Eventually, the Romans abandoned its use, but by then, the corvus had already played a pivotal role in securing Roman victories and establishing their credibility at sea. Over time, Rome's naval infrastructure matured significantly. By the height of the Republic and the early Empire, Roman fleets patrolled the western Mediterranean, ensuring the security of vital supply lines to Iberia and North Africa, and impeding Hannibal's efforts to reinforce his armies during campaigns on Italian soil. Naval blockades, amphibious landings, and convoy protection became standard tactics, reflecting Rome's growing sophistication in maritime operations. Under imperial rule, Roman naval power expanded further. The Classis Britannica, stationed in northern waters, and the Classis Germanica, securing the Rhine and North Sea regions, were among the key fleets tasked with protecting trade routes, suppressing piracy, and transporting troops. While the Navy was often not at the forefront of the empire's military campaigns, its strategic value was immense. Rome did not cultivate a maritime identity like Athens or Carthage. Rather, it regarded the sea as a tool to be mastered when necessary. Yet, by the 1st century CE, control of Mare Nostrum, the Mediterranean, was more than symbolic. It was an operational reality, securing Rome's imperial cohesion and enabling the empire to exert influence across 3 continents. Through adaptation, innovation, and relentless strategic foresight, Rome transformed the sea from a potential vulnerability into a fortified highway of empire. Control of the seas in antiquity was not merely about tactical victories in individual battles. It shaped borders, economies, and cultures. Command of maritime routes influenced trade, communication, and the movement of ideas, profoundly affecting civilizations far beyond the battlefield. Navies were central to the rise of empires. Athens became a cultural and economic powerhouse thanks to its naval fleet. Carthage leveraged maritime mastery to build a mercantile empire, and Rome, despite its initial inexperience, ultimately commanded the entire Mediterranean basin through persistent naval innovation. While all these powers maintained formidable land armies, it was their fleets that allowed them to strike across continents, defend distant territories, and cripple enemy economies from afar. The sea was also a conduit of culture and knowledge. Greek colonists traversed the Mediterranean to establish settlements in Italy, Asia Minor, and beyond, spreading language, art, religion, and civic ideals. Egyptian ships transported papyrus, gold, and sacred knowledge to distant courts, enabling cultural and diplomatic exchange. Venetian mariners, in later periods, carried the alphabet, architectural innovations, and religious customs to far-flung ports. Naval power, therefore, was not merely martial. It was a civilizing force that facilitated technological development, cultural transmission, and economic integration across vast regions. The technological demands of naval warfare drove remarkable advancements in engineering. The trireme, with its 3 tiers of oars, represented a leap forward in ship design, combining speed, maneuverability, and offensive capability. Later innovations, including the quinquereme and larger warships, pushed naval architecture to new heights. Harbors became logistical hubs, navigation techniques improved, and standardized ship designs laid the foundation for sophisticated maritime infrastructure in later Byzantine and Islamic navies. Economic systems evolved alongside these developments, as fleets secured sea lanes that allowed luxury goods, silk, spices, wine, tin, and other commodities to flow safely across vast distances. Cities with strong fleets, such as Alexandria and Rhodes, became cosmopolitan centers where trade, scholarship, and artistic production flourished, while naval dominance shaped urban prosperity and social complexity. The psychological impact of ancient naval tactics should not be underestimated. Fire ships, ramming, and boarding actions instilled fear, disrupted enemy formations, and altered the dynamics of warfare. The sea itself became a weapon, demonstrating that mobility, timing, and strategic mastery could be more decisive than brute force alone. This legacy of innovation, intimidation, and maritime dexterity influenced centuries of naval doctrine, leaving an enduring impression on military theory and historical imagination. Today, while the grandeur of land conquests often dominates narratives, the importance of sea power in shaping civilizations is equally significant. Ancient naval warfare was about understanding the sea not only as a battlefield, but as a stage upon which empires projected influence, facilitated commerce, and left indelible marks on history. Turning from Rome and Carthage to Persia, the story of Cyrus the Great exemplifies the convergence of personal destiny and strategic genius. Born around 600 BCE in Anshan, a Persian vassal kingdom under Median rule, Cyrus belonged to the Achaemenid royal family, which claimed noble ancestry and controlled a modest yet respected domain. His early life, however, seemed unremarkable. Legend, as recorded by the Greek historian Herodotus, casts Cyrus's birth in a dramatic light. According to Herodotus, King Astyages of Media, Cyrus's grandfather, received ominous dreams predicting that his daughter's son would one day overthrow him. Interpreters confirmed the threat, prompting Astyages to take decisive action. Astyages ordered a loyal servant, Harpagus, to eliminate the infant Cyrus. Harpagus, unwilling to commit the act himself, delegated the task to a shepherd. Rather than kill the child, the shepherd raised him as his own, hiding him in the mountains and raising him with the humble skill sets and resilience of rural life. Even as a child, Cyrus displayed remarkable charisma and leadership, commanding attention and respect from peers. His upbringing among both commoners and nobles gave him a nuanced understanding of human behavior, a trait that would later prove invaluable in statecraft and military command. Eventually, the truth of Cyrus's identity reached Astyages' court. The king, recognizing the potential threat, but perhaps moved by fate or conscience, spared Cyrus. In contrast, Harpagus faced brutal punishment for failing in his earlier assignment, illustrating the ruthless political environment of the Median court. Cyrus returned to Persia to live under his father, Cambyses I, now openly recognized as a member of the royal family. This early combination of hardship, near-death experiences, and exposure to both elite and common life forged in Cyrus the qualities of resilience, adaptability, and empathy that would define his reign. By the mid-6th century BCE, Cyrus had emerged as a capable and ambitious leader. The Median Empire, though powerful under Astyages, was vulnerable to internal dissent and regional instability. Cyrus, leveraging strategic alliances and his understanding of both noble and popular sentiment, orchestrated a revolt around 553 BCE. This uprising was neither sudden nor simplistic. It involved careful planning, diplomatic maneuvering, and military campaigns extending over 3 years. Cyrus's forces advanced methodically into Median territory, garnering support from disaffected nobles, tribal leaders, and regional allies. Cyrus distinguished himself not merely through martial prowess, but through strategic leniency. He often spared conquered enemies, earning loyalty and admiration rather than fear alone. Meanwhile, the court of Astyages weakened as internal dissent and betrayal undermined the traditional power structures. By 550 BCE, the Median Empire collapsed under the combined weight of military defeat and internal treachery. Cyrus entered Ecbatana, the Median capital, not as a brutal conqueror, but as a reforming ruler who preserved administrative institutions, respected local customs, and integrated Medes into his administration, a hallmark of his inclusive and pragmatic leadership style. Having secured the Iranian plateau, Cyrus turned his attention westward to Lydia, a wealthy and powerful kingdom under King Croesus. Croesus's wealth was legendary, with the capital city of Sardis gleaming with opulence and his armies well-trained and well-equipped. Misjudging Cyrus's ambition and strategy, Croesus sought to preempt Persian expansion by forging alliances with Egypt and Babylon and consulting the Oracle of Delphi. The famed oracle famously warned that if Croesus attacked Persia, he would destroy a great empire, prophecy that he interpreted to mean victory, unaware that he would bring about his own kingdom's downfall. This confrontation set the stage for a clash between ambition, strategy, and fate. Cyrus's campaigns in Lydia and subsequent conquests demonstrated the synthesis of military innovation, political acumen, and diplomatic pragmatism that characterized his reign. By carefully combining decisive military action with policies that integrated conquered peoples and respected local traditions, Cyrus established the foundations of the Achaemenid Empire, a polity that would span vast territories and endure for centuries. Throughout these narratives, from Roman naval innovation and strategic use of the Corvus, to the rise of Athenian and Carthaginian maritime empires, to the consolidation of Persian power under Cyrus, the interplay of technology, leadership, strategy, and vision emerges as a consistent theme. Control of the seas and command of armies was not merely a matter of brute force. It required ingenuity, adaptability, and the ability to understand both people and terrain. These civilizations harnessed naval and military power not only to achieve immediate victories, but to shape long-term cultural, economic, and political landscapes. The Corvus, triremes, fire ships, and Egyptian war vessels illustrate the evolution of naval architecture and tactics across different civilizations. Each innovation addressed specific challenges of mobility, firepower, and coordination while influencing broader strategic outcomes. Similarly, leadership figures such as Themistocles, Hannibal, and Cyrus the Great demonstrate how vision, charisma, and adaptability can overcome numerical or experiential disadvantages. turning potential vulnerabilities into strengths. Ancient naval warfare also had enduring civilizational effects. The protection of trade routes fostered the flow of goods, ideas, art, and culture. Port cities became hubs of commerce, learning, and innovation. Naval power enabled empires to extend influence far beyond their geographic origins, projecting authority across seas, rivers, and distant lands. Control of the Mediterranean, Nile, and other waterways was not merely tactical. It was the lifeblood of empire, shaping politics, economics, and cultural exchange. In summary, the histories of Rome, Athens, Carthage, Egypt, and Persia demonstrate that mastery of the sea, and, more broadly, strategic mastery of resources and human ingenuity, was as crucial as any land conquest. Naval innovation, logistical foresight, and adaptive leadership enabled these civilizations to protect their people, expand their influence, and leave legacies that would resonate for millennia. From the roaring oars of Athenian triremes to the disciplined ranks of Roman marines, and from the strategic cunning of Cyrus the Great to the wealth-driven fleets of Carthage, the ancient world reminds us that empires were forged not just through the sword, but through mastery of the waters that connected them. Encouraged by prophecies and alliances, Croesus, the wealthy and ambitious king of Lydia, launched an invasion against Persia, confident that he would crush the young Persian ruler, Cyrus. Yet fate had a different plan. The empire he sought to destroy turned out to be the one that would shatter his own kingdom. The two forces met near the Halys River in 547 BCE, engaging in a fiercely contested battle. Though Croesus initially managed to resist, he ultimately withdrew to the fortified city of Sardis, convinced that winter had brought the campaigning season to a close and that he could consolidate his forces for a spring counterattack, supported by allied contingents. Cyrus, however, was no ordinary opponent. Defying conventional military wisdom, he launched a bold winter campaign, pursuing Croesus into the heart of Lydia. Sardis, despite its fortifications, was ill-prepared for the rapid and decisive advance of the Persian army. According to Herodotus, Cyrus employed an ingenious tactical surprise. He used camels to frighten the Lydian cavalry, a core component of Croesus's military strength. The unfamiliar sight and smell of the camels caused panic among the Lydian horses, rendering them ineffective and throwing the army into disarray. Within weeks, Sardis fell. Croesus, the man who had once epitomized wealth and power, was captured alive. Yet what followed truly distinguished Cyrus as an exceptional ruler. Rather than executing Croesus, Cyrus reportedly spared his life, even welcoming him as an advisor. The famous story recounts that Croesus, moments away from being burned alive, invoked the name of Solon, the Greek philosopher, who had once cautioned him not to consider any man fortunate until the end of his life was known. Moved by this tale of wisdom and reflection, Cyrus ordered the flames extinguished. Whether myth or reality, the narrative illustrates a central feature of Cyrus's rule: clemency and strategic mercy. With Lydia subdued, Cyrus acquired not only vast wealth, but also control over critical trade networks and the Greek city-states along the Aegean coast. Though the Ionian cities resisted Persian rule, they were no match for Cyrus's expanding military and diplomatic machine. The fall of Croesus's kingdom represented more than a conquest of riches. It confirmed Cyrus's reputation as a leader capable of combining military brilliance with statesmanship, balancing force and leniency to secure loyalty and stability. By the late 550s BCE, Cyrus had consolidated his power across Persia and Lydia, leaving only one major obstacle between him and dominance of the Near East: Babylon. Babylon, once the jewel of Mesopotamia under kings like Hammurabi and Nebuchadnezzar II, had grown into a city of legendary magnificence, famed for its massive walls, towering ziggurats, and the mythical Hanging Gardens. Yet beneath its splendor, Babylon was vulnerable. At the time, the city was ruled by Nabonidus, a king increasingly unpopular with his people. His neglect of the priesthood of Marduk, Babylon's chief deity, and his prolonged absences from the capital alienated many. Real power in the city had fallen into the hands of his son, Belshazzar, whose governance failed to command the loyalty of key factions. Cyrus recognized these cracks and seized the opportunity. In 539 BCE, he initiated a campaign against Babylon that differed markedly from earlier sieges marked by destruction and slaughter. Cyrus's approach combined military force with shrewd diplomacy and psychological warfare. He captured key cities along the Tigris, such as Opis, not solely through combat, but also by presenting himself as a liberator. Persian forces proclaimed that Cyrus would restore justice, respect local traditions, and free the populace from misrule, thereby undermining the morale of Babylonian troops while encouraging local cooperation. When Cyrus reached Babylon, he achieved what might be considered one of the most remarkable military political feats in history. The city gates were opened to him without a fight. Whether through negotiation, internal betrayal, or strategic intimidation, the Persian army entered Babylon peacefully. Cyrus did not present himself as a conqueror, but as a restorer of order. He respected the city's temples, participated in religious ceremonies, and proclaimed himself chosen by Marduk, Babylon's chief god, to re-establish justice and peace. This policy of tolerance and inclusion was later immortalized in the Cyrus Cylinder, often cited as the world's first charter of human rights. The Cyrus Cylinder, a clay document inscribed in Akkadian cuneiform, recorded policies that emphasized religious freedom, repatriation of displaced peoples, and the protection of local customs. Among the most historically significant consequences of these policies was the liberation of the Jewish population exiled in Babylon decades earlier. Cyrus decreed that they could return to Jerusalem to rebuild their temple, earning him the unique distinction in the Hebrew Bible of being God's anointed, a title typically reserved for native Israelite kings. This act reflected a broader principle of governance. Authority derived legitimacy not from fear and oppression, but from justice, clemency, and respect for local traditions. Cyrus's approach contrasted sharply with the prevailing norms of ancient rulership, which often emphasized conquest, destruction, and forced assimilation. By combining military might with administrative ingenuity, he maintained control over a vast and diverse empire comprising Persians, Medes, Babylonians, Elamites, Egyptians, Hebrews, and numerous other peoples, each with their own languages, customs, and religious practices. Central to his administration was a decentralized governance model. He appointed satraps, or provincial governors, often chosen from local elites, who managed taxation, security, and legal matters while remaining accountable to the Persian crown. This system allowed Cyrus to maintain stability across enormous distances and diverse populations. He invested in infrastructure to secure trade routes, protect merchant caravans, and facilitate communication across the empire, recognizing that economic prosperity was as crucial to lasting power as military conquest. His policies fostered loyalty and minimized rebellion, as he balanced centralized authority with respect for local autonomy. In essence, Cyrus ruled not merely through force, but through a combination of diplomacy, strategic mercy, and efficient governance. Symbolism and ritual were also key to Cyrus's strategy. Upon entering conquered cities, he restored temples, participated in local religious ceremonies, and preserved indigenous institutions. These acts were not mere theatrics. They were deliberate diplomatic gestures that secured the allegiance of newly subjugated populations. Remarkably, this approach provoked minimal resistance. Cyrus did not just avoid rebellions. He often inspired genuine admiration, even among traditionally skeptical observers such as the Greeks. Xenophon, the Athenian historian and soldier, later praised Cyrus in the partly fictionalized biography Cyropaedia, presenting him as an ideal ruler whose leadership combined wisdom, virtue, and effectiveness. By the end of his reign, Cyrus the Great had reshaped the political and cultural landscape of the ancient Near East. His empire extended from the Aegean Sea in the west to the mountains of Central Asia in the east, encompassing a range of terrains, climates, and peoples. He had achieved unprecedented integration of military strategy, administrative innovation, and religious tolerance. Yet even as he consolidated these gains, Cyrus's ambition drove him toward further campaigns, including a final expedition into the northeastern steppes. Around 530 BCE, Cyrus turned his attention to the Massagetes, a confederation of nomadic tribes east of the Caspian Sea. These fierce horse-riding warriors were led by their queen, Thamyris, renowned both as a capable military commander and as a symbol of resistance. The Massagetes posed a significant threat to the eastern borders of the Persian Empire. Herodotus's accounts of the campaign, likely dramatized, describe a mixture of diplomacy, cunning, and ultimately tragedy. Cyrus initially attempted to negotiate, offering marriage to Queen Thamyris as a political alliance. She recognized this as a ploy and rejected his proposal. Failing diplomacy, Cyrus resorted to trickery. He left supplies of wine and rich foods, knowing the Massagetes were unaccustomed to alcohol. After a celebratory banquet, many Massagetes warriors, incapacitated by the unfamiliar intoxication, were ambushed and killed, including Thamyris' son. Enraged, Queen Thamyris rallied her forces for a climactic confrontation. The ensuing battle was disastrous for Cyrus. According to Herodotus, he was killed in combat, and his body was reportedly treated with gruesome vengeance by the Massagetes. While the precise details may be embellished, the campaign marked the end of Cyrus's life far from the cities he had conquered and consolidated. Cyrus's remains were eventually returned to Pasargadae, the capital he had founded, and interred in a modest yet dignified tomb, still standing today as a testament to his enduring legacy. His death marked the close of a remarkable era, passing the throne to his son, Cambyses II, who continued the empire's expansion, particularly into Egypt. However, Cyrus's unique combination of tolerance, strategic vision, and administrative genius set a standard that few rulers would match. The significance of Cyrus the Great extends beyond territorial expansion. He left behind a political blueprint emphasizing decentralized governance, respect for local customs, and strategic use of clemency to maintain loyalty. His empire demonstrated that power could be exercised through both force and benevolence, balancing military conquest with administrative efficiency and cultural inclusivity. The policies enshrined in the Cyrus Cylinder, the restoration of temples, the repatriation of displaced populations, and the integration of local elites into governance all reflect a ruler who understood that the stability and prosperity of an empire depended on more than fear. It required legitimacy, justice, and respect for diversity. Cyrus's legacy endured long after his death. His model of leadership influenced subsequent empires, from the Achaemenids under Darius and Xerxes to later states in the Near East and beyond. He demonstrated that an empire could be vast not only in terms of territory, but also in the cohesion and loyalty of its people. His strategic vision, combined with cultural sensitivity, laid the foundation for one of the largest and most stable empires the world had yet seen. In summary, Cyrus the Great was more than a conqueror. He was a statesman, visionary, and administrator. His campaigns against Lydia and Babylon illustrate his tactical brilliance, while his policies of tolerance, inclusion, and clemency highlight a revolutionary approach to governance. Even his final campaign, though ending in death, underscores the audacity and ambition that defined his reign. By balancing military might with diplomacy, respecting local customs, and employing strategic mercy, Cyrus created an empire that was remarkable both for its scale and its enduring stability. His death marked the end of an extraordinary era, but the political, administrative, and philosophical legacies of his rule continue to resonate, providing a timeless model of enlightened leadership in the annals of history. Stretching from the Aegean Sea in the west to the Indus Valley in the east, the Persian Empire established by Cyrus the Great was unparalleled not only for its size, but for the sophistication of its governance. The empire's greatness lay as much in its structure and administration as in its boundaries. Cyrus had pioneered policies of inclusion, religious tolerance, and decentralized administration, creating a model that would influence his successors for generations. His son, Cambyses II, continued the empire's expansion, while later rulers like Darius the Great formalized its structures, transforming what had been a bold and flexible system into a durable imperial framework. One of the central features of Persian administration was the satrapy system. Regional governors, or satraps, oversaw law and order, collected taxes, and were directly accountable to the king. This delegation of authority allowed the empire to remain vast yet remarkably efficient, maintaining control over diverse populations spread across deserts, mountains, rivers, and plains. Importantly, the empire maintained policies of religious and cultural freedom. Temples from Babylonian ziggurats to Egyptian sanctuaries continued to operate without interference. Local elites were often left in positions of authority, provided they recognized Persian sovereignty. This pragmatic tolerance minimized rebellion and fostered loyalty among conquered peoples, not through fear, but through inclusion and respect. Cyrus's approach also introduced a philosophical dimension to kingship. Unlike the boastful, self-aggrandizing rulers of the past, Cyrus viewed power as a moral responsibility. His authority was inseparable from the welfare of his subjects. This conception of rulership as a moral and ethical role, rather than merely a political one, endured long after his death. Titles such as King of the Four Corners of the World were not mere vanity. They reflected the scale of his authority and his obligation to govern justly. His tomb at Pasargadae, a modest limestone structure, symbolized both humility and permanence. Even centuries later, Alexander the Great paid homage to Cyrus, restoring his tomb after it had been desecrated, demonstrating the enduring reverence for his legacy. Cyrus's influence extended beyond Persia. He was invoked by later dynasties to legitimize rule, and Zoroastrian priests associated him with divine justice. In Iranian national identity, he remains celebrated as the father of the nation. His reputation was not limited to Persia or the Near East. In the Hebrew Bible, Cyrus is depicted not as a foreign tyrant, but as a divinely appointed liberator. Isaiah refers to him as the anointed of the Lord, a designation otherwise reserved for Israelite kings. By allowing the Jews to return to Jerusalem and rebuild their temple, Cyrus left an indelible mark on Jewish history. His image as a righteous, benevolent ruler who wielded power to restore, rather than destroy, faith and freedom became legendary. Even the Greeks, often hostile to Persian barbarians, admired Cyrus. Xenophon, a student of Socrates, wrote Cyropaedia, a partly fictionalized biography presenting him as the ideal ruler, wise, moderate, just, and courageous. Though not a strictly historical account, it shaped Hellenistic and Roman ideas of leadership and ethics for centuries. In Islamic tradition, some scholars identify Cyrus with Dhu al-Qarnayn, the two-horned one mentioned in the Quran, a king of righteousness who erected protective structures to shield people from chaos and injustice. While debated, this association reflects the enduring respect Cyrus commands across Abrahamic faiths. Cyrus's legacy reached beyond religion and philosophy, inspiring political leaders across time. In 1776, Thomas Jefferson reportedly kept a copy of the Cyrus cylinder beside his bed. In the 20th century, Iran's last Shah invoked Cyrus as a symbol of unity and reform. Today, the cylinder, often described as the world's first declaration of human rights, is displayed at the United Nations as a global emblem of tolerance, justice, and governance. Cyrus's appeal transcends mere conquest. He is remembered not for cruelty or the expansion of borders alone, but for his rare ability to wield power with justice and to inspire loyalty through respect rather than fear. More than 2 millennia after his death, Cyrus remains a paradox, a conqueror celebrated for compassion, a king revered by those he subjugated. Few figures in history command such universal admiration, and few have earned it so fully. Across other civilizations, hair carried similar symbolic weight, serving as a marker of identity, status, spirituality, and power. In the blistering sun of Egypt's Nile Valley, the elite shaved their heads not only for hygiene, but to create a clean canvas upon which to display elaborate wigs. These wigs were more than ornamental. They communicated wealth, social standing, and ritual purity. They could be constructed from human hair, horsehair, or woven plant fibers, often layered, braided, and adorned with gold beads or perfumed wax cones that slowly melted in the sun, scenting the wearer. Women's hairstyles were intimately tied to femininity, fertility, and power. A noblewoman's wig might be embellished with flowers, precious metals, or intricate braiding to signify status or religious devotion. Priestesses wore precise, symmetrical styles reflecting divine order. Men in service to Pharaoh sported stylized wigs that reflected not only wealth, but their proximity to the divine hierarchy. Children often wore the side lock of youth, a single braid preserved until maturity or ceremonial rites. In contrast, priests shaved their heads entirely for ritual purity, sometimes wearing ceremonial wigs during religious observances to signify spiritual authority rather than personal identity. The significance of hair was equally profound in Norse culture. Viking hairstyles were far from random. They were deliberate symbols of identity, masculinity, clan loyalty, and even seduction. Both men and women cultivated their hair carefully. Men braided or tied their hair in top knots, half-shaved heads, or full braids, conveying both readiness for battle and social status. Women wove intricate patterns with beads or ribbons, signaling marital status or clan affiliation. Hair was legally protected. Cutting someone's hair without consent was considered a grave insult, potentially triggering feuds or legal retaliation. Hair also featured prominently in Norse mythology. Gods like Thor, with his fiery red beard, and Loki, who changed his appearance through transformation, underscore the cultural significance of hair as both identity and divine symbolism. The Romans, too, wielded hair as a potent social instrument. In the early Republic, clean-cut, practical hairstyles for men signaled discipline, civic virtue, and allegiance to the state. As the empire matured, styles became more elaborate, with emperors and elites mimicking Greek aesthetics or sculptural ideals. Women's hairstyles became architectural feats, exemplified by the Flavian Tower style, a towering arrangement of curls maintained by slave labor. Hair indicated social rank, wealth, and political allegiance. Enslaved people and soldiers, by contrast, were constrained to simple or short hairstyles, denying them both status and self-expression. In Japan, hair symbolized duty, honor, and social rank. Samurai wore top knots, chanmage, originally for practical reasons, ensuring helmets fit securely, but the style became a potent symbol of warrior identity. Losing the top knot was tantamount to social death and often preceded ritual suicide, seppuku. Women's hairstyles, from the towering shimada of courtesans to simpler aristocratic arrangements, indicated marital status, age, and social role, while also serving as a medium of beauty, elegance, and subtle social communication. African societies also imbued hair with profound cultural and spiritual meaning. From the intricate braids of the Sahel to the red ochre-coated hairstyles of the Himba in Namibia, hair signified age, marital status, clan affiliation, and spiritual identity. Hairdressers were revered almost as priests, entrusted with the very essence of an individual's identity. During the transatlantic slave trade, hairstyles encoded resistance, survival strategies, and memory of homeland. Cornrows could serve as maps, signaling escape routes or safe meeting points, preserving cultural knowledge under the threat of erasure. In ancient Greece, hair was a marker of civilization, virtue, and social rank. Homeric heroes were depicted with flowing locks, symbolizing nobility and divine favor. By the classical era, Athenian men favored short, well-groomed hair paired with beards, denoting wisdom and maturity. Women's hairstyles conveyed domestic virtue, age, and societal standing. Girls wore hair down until puberty, after which it was braided and often dedicated to deities like Artemis. Hair mirrored divine attributes, Athena's helmeted, orderly style signified strategy and discipline, while Aphrodite's flowing curls represented beauty and sensuality. In China, hair was inseparable from moral philosophy, familial duty, and imperial control. Cutting hair without reason was considered a grave offense against filial piety. Men tied their long hair into buns or top knots, paired with robes and caps denoting rank and wisdom. Women's hairstyles indicated marital status, age, and class. Dynastic changes often mandated new hair regulations, as during the Qing conquest, when Han men were forced to adopt the queue, a hairstyle symbolizing subjugation to Manchu rule. Taoist and Buddhist monks, by shaving their heads, demonstrated detachment from worldly concerns. In India, hair intertwined with ritual purity, caste, spiritual devotion, and social identity. Ascetics wore long, matted dreadlocks, jata, to signify renunciation and spiritual power, emulating Shiva. Pilgrims shaved their heads as a form of surrender and purification. Children's first haircuts marked rites of passage, cleansing karma and signaling social maturity. Men's shikha, a tuft at the crown, denoted caste and religious obligations, while women's hair conveyed marital status, discipline, and beauty. Elaborate ornamentation during festivals, weddings, and temple rituals reinforced social hierarchy and spiritual expression. Hair was also a subtle tool of resistance. Under Roman rule, Jews maintained distinct hairstyles to preserve religious identity. Celts in Gaul used wild, spiked hairstyles as a form of defiance and intimidation. Enslaved peoples across civilizations were forced to shave their heads, stripping them of cultural identity. Yet they found ways to encode memory, maps, and heritage into braided or concealed styles. Spartans and other societies employed hair as a marker of independence, rebellion, or social philosophy, demonstrating that hair was not merely aesthetic but a deeply embedded instrument of culture, identity, and resistance. Across ancient civilizations, hair functioned as a silent language, conveying rank, allegiance, spiritual devotion, political stance, and personal identity. From the Persian courts to African villages, from the Greek polis to Japanese samurai compounds, hair was more than a physical attribute. It was a medium of communication, a symbol of power, a tool of rebellion, and a testament to human creativity. In a world where voices could be silenced and swords could be drawn, hair often spoke louder than words, broadcasting identity, allegiance, and defiance across generations and empires.